people make an error when they approach the Torah, and they sometimes think that the Torah is not about reality. There's like two worlds. There's the world that we live in, we sense, and it's tangible, we can describe it. And then there's, I have to call it a make-believe world of the Torah. So in the interest of contributing to correcting that fundamental error, there's no greater error in my opinion, and it's the worst error that can be made in terms of to achieve, in order for us to, it's the error that hinders us most from achieving what the Torah wants, in my opinion. So in the interest of furthering, let's say, correcting that error, I'm going to share a recipe, a Torah recipe, right? Something about food. And something that the Torah claims about food, and I'm going to show you what it means. I'm going to tell you how to have good food. Specifically, we're talking about the spice called the Shabbos spice. Everyone knows that we have a special spice. It's called Shabbos, and it makes our food taste better. So anyone who's interested in the culinary arts and likes good food should probably look into and understand the Shabbos spice, see if it works for them, perhaps understand how it works, and probably then learn how to appreciate it better. So I want to tell you how it works, literally, how your food tastes better on Shabbos and what to do about it. And this is really a instruction, as it were, instruction for how to do Einik Shabbos in general. So here's the idea. The most fundamental, basic idea of Shabbos, in my opinion, the significance of the fact that Hashem stopped working is that he completed the world. And think about that notion, the notion of completion. The notion of completion, the idea that the world can be complete, is a very fundamental philosophical stance about reality, because what it means is that there's a perfection to the world. Okay? Meaning, what I mean to say is like this: you could imagine a theory of reality where the notion of completion is completely irrelevant. The world is what it is, ever changing, you can say, ever expanding, you can say. And therefore, any given moment is merely a point in time. Any given state of the world is merely the way it happens to be at that particular point in time. But there's no concept then of perfection and completion, especially if you're an Epicurus and you believe everything is random. It just is that way because that happens to be the way it is. There's no reason. Things are not the way they ought to be, but they are just as they are. Then there is no concept of perfection. Now, the idea that God rested means that the world is complete and perfect. Now, the world is not complete and perfect, and we have a lot of work to do, and that tells us something about, and I don't want to go into this, but that's the idea of Shabbos being Keneged Olam Haba. And of course, work has to do with the Sheishis and Hamasa. So the point is that there is an element or an aspect, or we can even say a possibility, a built-in tendency towards completion, towards perfection in the world. The world will one day be perfected. But that is not merely a prediction about the future. That's something we can talk about and think about today. And the reason why we can think about that today, live that today, is because a world which tends towards perfection, a world which eventually will be perfected, has within it the quality of perfection that it's realizing, that it's finding, that it's working towards, right? Okay. So now that brings us to the idea of Shabbos. So resting from work it connotes that the concept of things being done, being completed, things being right, is in fact an inherent part of reality. Okay? Now, where does Einik come in? where does pleasure come in? Pleasure comes in because there is no greater pleasure than being right. There's no greater pleasure than being perfected. If a person knows that what he's doing is right, then he is pleased. Often people get pleasure from things without this deep philosophical understanding of being right, and that's because there are circuits of pleasure in the mind that can circumvent, let's say, this kind of sense of truth, of what's truly right, and give the illusion of things being right. Pleasure when it's misplaced is the illusion of things being right. But the root of pleasure, the reason why there is pleasure, is it's a reflection of correctness, rightness. And therefore the idea that there's a possibility for the world to be perfect gives us pleasure. More than that, when you are tasting the Shabbos food, what you're doing is you're giving yourself a taste of perfection. You're telling yourself, I want to see the perfection. I can think about perfection. I can feel. I can, in fact, taste that perfection. So now let's get back to the recipe, and here's what you have to do. When you take a bite of the delicious Shabbos food, you have to think about the fact that the taste, the flavor, the fact that it tastes so delicious is a reflection of the fact that there is perfection in this world. And by the way, it really is a reflection of that, because we believe that that all goodness, including pleasure, which is a subjective experience of it, is rooted in the fact that this is a good world. But when you actually think about that consciously, and don't just think about the fact that it's a good world in some vague sort of way, but think about the fact that it's a perfect world, and then you take that thought and you bring it back to that, whatever it is you're biting into, whatever it is you're eating, you bring back that thought and say, look, the perfection of the world is reflected in this. I am partaking of perfection. I am eating something here which is a part, in fact, it really is, a part of and a symbol of a perfected world. It's a part of a perfect world, and it's a symbol of a future perfected world. And by thinking about that, by really thinking about that, by putting that in the forefront of your mind, you will see that your experience will be completely different than any weekday experience. And that the best food you taste on a weekday does not approach the intensity and the pleasure of that experience. And that, in my opinion, is exactly what Chazal mean when they talk about the spice of Shabbos. And that, in my opinion, is what we should all do to taste this spice. So again, I hope I gave you a little bit of instruction about how to do this. You have to eat something nice that you prepared, of course, with Shabbos in mind, meaning with this idea that, look, it's Hashem's perfect world. Let's honor it. Let's honor Hashem's perfection. Let's honor perfection by enjoying it, by getting pleasure from it, because if it's perfect, it should be pleasing. And then when the pleasure we get when we eat, and by the way, of course, this extends to other forms of eating Shabbos, that pleasure is the pleasure of the world being a perfect place, because God completed His work. And although we can't access that perfection yet, in reality, because we still have work to do, we believe that the world is going towards that perfection. And that's why we talk about Shabbos being me'ein olam haba, something really about the next world, but something we can yet at the same time have a flavor of now. And that flavor is represented in the literal flavor of the food. So you dig in, you take a bite, think about perfection, think about the fact that the world is perfect, and you'll see that your food is enriched. So that's my cooking advice, that's my culinary advice, my recipe, and it's. I hope you take this and think about it more broadly. That the Torah is, of course, in the mind, but the mind is the most powerful thing, and the mind is the most powerful thing. Even if you care about cooking, even if culinary arts is your thing, the mind is still the most powerful thing. And as long as the food tastes good, maybe even if it's not good food, you can do this. I don't know, but the flavor comes from the mind. the tavlin of Shabbos comes to the mind from recognizing that the flavor of the food, the deliciousness of the food, is a reflection of the delicious perfection of Hashem's perfect world.